All right. So before we start talking about the next two essay prompts, I just want to spend a little bit of time talking about registration for next semester. Registration priority is going to be in the 15th of November. And so what that means is that starting the 15th of November, people will be able to start registering. It's going to depend on a bunch of different factors, what your priority is when it comes to registration. So some students have different registration priorities. Depending on, how long they've been students at Solano, how many units they have, what part of like services they use at Solano College. And so to be able to figure out your registration priority, you just log into My Solano, and then you can see over here on the left-hand side, just click the student tab. Once you click the student tab over here in these options, you can click when can I register? And so I just click when can I register? And then it'll give you the option to select spring 2022, click that one. And then right now you can see on mine, it says right here with this little kind of red circle that you have no registration time ticket. Please complete an application at CCC Apply. So it's been a while since I've taken a class at Solano. I usually take sign language classes, but I haven't taken one in the last 2 years or so. So as a result of that, I'm no longer technically a Solano College student. So I just have to re-register. And then after I do that, then I'll have my registration priority. So this is good to check on now, just because if there's anything that you have that could potentially be holding up registration, you won't see your priority yet. So for example, if there's any holds on your account, maybe, you need to re-register for some reason, or which is pretty unlikely, I imagine. Or, like if you still have some tuition to pay or something like that, then there would be a registration hold potentially. So you just want to make sure that that's there. And then you right here where mine says you have no registration time ticket, yours will say, you're allowed to start registering on November 17th at 8:30 a.m. or whatever time they give you and whatever day they give you. It's really important to make note of that time and day, because this way, the sooner that you get to registration, the better chances you have on taking the exact classes you want with the exact teachers that you want. And so some classes are going to fill up pretty quick. It just really depends on, popularity of teacher, the time the class is offered, what the class is, all that kind of stuff. And so let me just show you really quick. I'm just going to go to our main page and I'll reshare my screen. I'll just show you really quick how you'll actually see what classes are available. So here we go, share again. There we go. All right, so you just go to class search. So next semester and then I'm going to go to our English classes and then talk a little bit about English 2 versus English 4, because those are the options of where to go after passing English 1. So I'm just going to click on our English classes, spring 2022. Okay, so after completing English 1, there's two options of where you can go. One class is English 2, which is critical thinking and writing about literature. And the other class is English 4, which is critical thinking and composition, language and context. So the difference between these classes is you don't have to take English 2 and then take English 4. They're both the same. So imagine kind of like a tree branches off and there's kind of, or like those two different roads are able to go down. The roads are exactly the same. They meet the same requirements for classes. The difficulty of the class is the same. Sorry, I felt the sneeze coming on and it wouldn't go. The difficulty of the classes are the same. What they meet as far as the requirement for general education are the same. It's just really kind of like a choose your own adventure on which one of these classes you would like to do over the other. So English 4 is similar to a lot of the work that we did in English 1. It's just a much, kind of a more in-depth version of that. Meaning that in this class, you're going to be focusing a lot on, or pretty much exclusively on nonfiction writing. And you're going to be looking at developing critical thinking skills through working with that nonfiction writing. So for example, a lot of the stuff that you'll do is kind of looking at how writers create their arguments with this, evaluating the way arguments are built, looking at things like the use of rhetoric in writing, understanding propaganda as a tool that writers use and being able to identify that in readings, being able to identify like weak arguments in the sense of them being illogical, what are called logical fallacies, and kind of the mistakes that writers can make when they're creating their arguments. So a lot of really close reading strategies, but again, all focused on nonfiction reading. So there isn't one section of English 4 that's going to be offered on campus. We're in a situation now where we're starting to try to return more and more classes to campus as we can. And there is a vaccine mandate on campus. So if a face-to-face class is something that you want to do, I really recommend it. Both Chris and I are on campus this semester, and it's been just really, really nice to be on campus and be in a room with people and kind of be learning in a traditional sense. But if you want to continue online, that's totally fine too. And there's more options for online classes. So the two options, this one says Vallejo, but these are actually correspondence courses that should be labeled as Vacaville. So those ones aren't available for registration. They're restricted because they're courses that are offered at CMF at the corrections facility. So the ones that you want to be looking at are either face-to-face, which is this one class right here that's being taught by Isabel Anderson, who's a fantastic teacher. And that class is going to fill up really quick. So if you know that you want to take English 4 on campus, there's only one option. Make sure that you have your registration priority like locked in, kind of ready to go, know what it is if you want to sign up for this class. I think you really would enjoy this class. She's a great teacher, and it'll be nice to be in a face-to-face class in that context. Over here in the online classes, any of these instructors that you take here, both Sarah McKinnon and Josh Scott, you're going to have an awesome experience in their English 4 classes. So English 4, you'll be in good hands, whether you're on campus taking Isabel Anderson's class or you're online with either Sarah or Josh. They're both fantastic teachers, and you'll really enjoy those classes. So English 2 differs from English 4. It's a critical thinking class, just the same, but it is a critical thinking class that's based off of reading literature. So in this class, you're going to be diving into kind of close reading and then writing analytical essays, but using literature to do that. So depending on the instructor, people use different things. I'm teaching a section of this class on campus on Monday and Wednesday from 9 to 10:50. And in my English 2 class, we use a lot of short stories. We're using a graphic novel. We use a couple plays. Some teachers use a lot of poetry. It really depends on the individual instructor, but it's kind of a nice offering of an intro to literature analysis class. And I think this is a really cool class to take, especially like when I took English 2 for the first time. I was a little bit afraid of it because I was like, I don't know if like how I feel about taking a literature analysis class, but that was all the better reason for me to take it, because it was just gave me an opportunity to like try something that I hadn't done before. So, we look at a lot of like drawing inferences in text, or being able to utilize things like literary devices in text, and think about how writers can set up things like allegory and use simile and metaphor, understanding the difference between connotation and denotation, really looking closely at like the vocabulary that writers choose to use, and what kind of feelings they're trying to invoke, and to help us get a deeper message of what a piece is about. So English 2, again, this one's going to have more offerings. There's some face-to-face stuff happening here. Josh Scott is teaching 2 sections of English 2 face-to-face. Isabel Anderson, this one's part of a learning community called Puente. So it's already students who are taking her English 1 that are going to be taking it. I'm teaching a section of English 2 face-to-face. And then there's a bunch of other instructors who are teaching it online. So I would really recommend, if you're taking one of these online classes, you'd be in some good hands taking different classes. You got Chris McBride, Michael Wiley, Isabel Anderson, Glenn Kaiser, right? Like, so you have some instructors in here. Those are the ones that I know pretty well as far as teaching this class. So I think you'd be in good hands taking any of their classes. But again, another nice opportunity to start coming back to campus if that's something that you're interested in doing, and having some face-to-face experience with one of these classes.
Yeah, and I've taken English 2, and I've worked with some of these professors, and I've had some of these professors as a student. So if you want to ask me about like a student perspective on some of these teachers in these classes, feel free to ask me, or ask other people in your class or friends you have on campus. It's good to get kind of a network to figure out what kind of classes you want to be taking and what you know about the professors.
Yeah, and so what I'd recommend is, again, figure out what your registration priority is as soon as you can, right? So that you're ready to register when the time comes, especially, when you start thinking about those classes that don't have a ton of sections of them being offered, or you want to return to campus and there's some, very specific times that you want to be able to go to school. That's where registration priority comes in really handy. All right, so let's talk then about this week's stuff and take a look at some essay prompts. Share screen, there we go. Okay, so this week, things to do this week, we're just completing Born a Crime. We'll need it for the third essay, and then I'll talk about the essay prompts, both for the third essay and for the research prompt. Okay, so let me take a look at this essay prompt. So this is the essay prompt for essay number 3, which is giving you the opportunity to analyze Born a Crime, right? So Trevor Noah is going to explore a wide variety of topics throughout his book, right? I mean, we've looked at everything from language to neighborhood to bias and cultural identity and ethnic identity, and, you know, really kind of being able to dive in through his life experiences and be able to like make some different comments about a lot of these topics that he explored throughout his book. So what we're going to be doing is analyzing, maybe thinking about one of these topics, whether it's be environment, family, or language, and really thinking about how that, the influence that has on shaping identity, right? Specifically how it shaped his identity. So there's 3 different prompts that you'll be able to go off of to be able to use to dive into this novel or into this memoir. And so as you're reading through it, you know, and thinking about these prompts, the key to this is that you're using the entire book, right? So that's really important when it comes to criteria for success. And you'll also see it on the rubric for how I'll grade this, is that it should be evident to me as I'm reading through your essay, or should be evident to your reader as they're reading through your essay, that you've read the whole book, right? So if you're making a pretty strong claim about maybe how one of these things, maybe specifically how he was a cultural chameleon and maybe felt like an outsider, if there's evidence of that, that like really strong examples of evidence that exist in later chapters, which there are, and those are kind of ignored, or maybe he makes a transition or growth throughout his book, and really the only examples that are brought out, and this happened sometimes, is like stuff that's very early on in the book. Well, it's kind of evident that the later part of the book wasn't read, and so you want to make sure that you're showing stuff from the whole span of the book, right? So that you're able to really be able to dive in and get to a deeper understanding of the claims that you're making in this essay. So here are the 3 different essay prompts. The first one, Trevor Noah argues that one's dreams and ambitions can be limited by environment where he or she lives. Focusing on Noah and or other people in the novel, analyze the impact that environment has had on one's sense of self. Were people in this book limited or controlled by their surroundings? And make sure that you cite specific examples to support your essay. So for this first essay prompt, you're really looking at this idea, you know, it's kind of that quote that Trevor Noah makes that we've looked at pretty closely earlier on, is this idea of like, you know, kind of following your dreams, but depending on where you are, your dreams can be limited, right? So really kind of thinking about whatever characters you want to use, whatever people in Noah's life you want to use. It doesn't have to be just one person. It definitely can. You could focus all on, you know, Noah, or all on his mom, but you can also focus a bit on maybe, for example, Noah, or focusing on Abel or his mother, right? Or different characters throughout the book. That your idea would be to think about what are some of the ways that people's ambitions or their sense of identity are impacted by their surroundings. This could be positively, this could be negatively, this could be somewhere in between. But for this first essay prompt, you're really kind of exploring this idea. And we've seen this, you know, specifically like with Noah and his mom, is that they moved from different places, right? They moved from neighborhood to neighborhood. And within those different neighborhoods, he was able to have some significant growth and significant changes based on the environment that he was in, whether the environment that he was in was a very heavily segregated environment, whether it's a very heavily integrated environment, right? And then he really talks about that idea of like the impact that it had for him moving into like a colored neighborhood where it wasn't Black, it wasn't white, but it was people who were mixed ethnicity similar to him. Similarly, we can also think about environment of how Noah's life changed from when it was just him and his mom to when it was him and his mom living with Abel, and then it was kind of back to him and his mom, right? And so think about some of those different examples of the impact that environment can have on someone. So again, for the first essay prompt, you could focus on him, or you could focus on another person specifically, or you could focus on more than one person in this book to be able to help dive into your essay. Essay prompt number 2. Because of his mixed ethnicity, Noah refers to himself as a cultural chameleon and expresses how he was always an outsider. How was Noah impacted by being one of the few mixed people growing up in an extremely polarized Black and white environment? Does this have positive or negative impacts on him? and make sure that you cite specific examples in the text in order to support your claims. So now we're kind of really jumping into this idea of like him being that cultural chameleon, right? So everything from, you know, the way that people interact with him, the way that his family treats him, you know, examples he gives, like not being cited for shoplifting because the camera wasn't able to pick up the tone of his skin and it was his friend, right? Like, so many different examples. If he talks about like how he was navigating the world around him based off of kind of being able to blend between multiple different environments, right? The way he was treated in school, for example, is a really place that you can dive into this. So this one is really focusing on this idea of like Noah being a cultural chameleon and the impact that it has on him as he kind of navigated this really polarizing environment. And then the final essay prompt is number 3, which is in chapter 5, Noah defines the black tax and how it hinders Black people's social progression in Africa, or in South Africa at the time. After his mother is shot, Noah states that his mother's greatest fear was that he would end up paying the black tax and get trapped by the cycle of poverty and violence. And she talks about this towards the end of the book. So the question then, kind of thinking about that throughout the entire book, is how did Noah's mother work to ensure that her fear would not become a reality? And how did the close relationship that Noah had with his life, with her throughout his life, impact him? Use evidence from the book to support your argument. So this one's really writing about that idea of like, that was Noah's mom's biggest fear that she talks about on what she thinks is her deathbed, right? Is this idea of like, I want to make sure that you don't get stuck in this cycle of poverty, right? That plagues so many people around them in their community. And so there were things that she did along the way to make sure that wasn't the case. So what you're going to be doing is finding evidence and analyzing the impact that those had on Noah, because obviously we know that wasn't the case with Noah because we're reading his book. We see him on television, right? Like that he's a notable person and that his mom was able to succeed in preventing her biggest fear. And so that's what you're focusing on for the third essay prompt. Are there any questions on these essay prompts?
I have a question. For the first one.
Sure.
So you said we had to cite the whole book. So then for the first one, I thought about just like that one chapter when Noah was just talking about the hood the whole time. And I could just use like those the characters in his group and how like it's just sad how like they don't have options to not exactly get out, you know. You said I had to cite the whole book, so I can't really do that.
So that would be probably one paragraph. That's the way I would imagine.
No, that makes sense. Yeah, makes sense.
And then in another paragraph, then you would find another piece of evidence. So that piece of examples, that would work really well, right? When he talks about like hanging out with the Cheese Boys and what their environment was like and how it impacted them, right? And then that's right. That would be one body paragraph. Then you would find another piece of evidence of how people are impacted by their environment for another body paragraph. And that's where you would use a different part of the book to help you do that. It's a good question.
Sense. Okay.
All right. So successful paper, right? Introduction, prepare the reader for, he has a thesis, clear controlling idea. Conclusion, we give that final sense of so what. Break it into paragraphs, right? Each addressing no more than one main idea. So kind of to Sebastian's question, like that claim you'd make, the evidence from the book, that would be that one put together paragraph with the analysis, then move on to another one. Well-framed quotes or paraphrases, right? Would you introduce the source, give the evidence? You might want to use your own experience and observations, but I think most of this for the essay prompt will really dive into using Noah to be able to back it up. And then also assume that your reader has not read. You can tie into other essays if you want to, but the only required source for this is the book, right? But I think this would be definitely one of those places where if you were to talk about how people are impacted by their environment, that you could tie into any of the other readings we've done this semester. If we talk about people are affected by the biases that people have against them, again, you can tie into any of the readings we've had this semester. So there's a lot of opportunity to be able to tie in other readings, but you don't have to at this point. But the big thing is we want to assume that our reader has not read Trevor Noah's book, right? That this is something that we need to give the reader enough context. So we can't just be like, and then Noah said, like, well, who's Noah? And he said to his mom, and it's like, well, what's significant about the relationship he has with his mom, right? What was the environment like at the time? And so you'll have to make sure you're giving evidence of that to be able to support your claims. This should be about a 3-page paper, about 750 words, and then have a works cited page. And again, the only required source in this essay is Noah's book, but if you use any other readings, then you would add those into the works cited also. Any questions at all about essay 3? All right. And if you do, when you're working, just let us know and we can take a look at some ideas you have together. All right, so let me share the essay prompt for the research paper. So I'm giving you the research paper pretty early, right? And that's with intention, right? Like I want to make sure that you have plenty of time to start thinking about this research paper and working on it, right? Over the course between now and the end of the semester. So the research paper is our final thing that we turn in for this class. And the research paper is going to be broken up into a bunch of little pieces to lead up to the final essay, right? And that's intentional to be able to help you feel like it's not going to be something that's incredibly overwhelming waiting into the end to do it, because it will be, right? It'll be one of those things that if you try to wait until the very end and don't kind of like do these smaller assignments along the way and like work on it piece at a time, it's going to feel pretty close to impossible to be able to get this done working on it like the last couple of days before it's due, right? Think about it like kind of like that pacing with anything that we do where we have like a goal that we want to reach that's somewhere down the line. It's really important to kind of work on it a little bit at a time to help us get there. Like I'm getting ready to go in February and do a run with some friends who are running a half marathon. And it's like, I'll be ready to do it in February, right? And I need to along the way set checkpoints for myself to be able to get there. If I wait until like it's February 5th, and if I wait until like February 1st and I'm like, get off the couch and I'm like, all right, time to go run, right? And I give myself a few days, I'm going to have a horrible time and I'm probably not going to be able to finish the thing. But a little bit at a time, if I just kind of chip away at it and work my way towards it, by the time that I get to that day, it's going to feel like no problem because I've done a lot of heavy lifting along the way to get me there, right? And it's like, I think that's really important to think about that in a lot of contexts with big assignments that we have throughout school, is kind of think about like, you know, chipping away. And sometimes life happens and there's, you know, like, usually that's the way that I go about grading essays, right? I chip away, I do a couple a day, I do a little bit here and there. And then I kind of like make sure that I hit my deadlines of having them in. This semester, you know, like the last essay, there was, my grandfather died, like it was like some busy weeks, and it was like I wasn't able to chip away like I normally do. And so there were days where I had to like sit at my computer and grade for like 8 hours, 10 hours a day. And it was hard. Like it's not something that I want to normally do because it doesn't set me up to be successful, right? And I think that's really helpful for school. Yeah, go ahead, Chris. Sorry.
I would say, like, with my experience as a student, that's especially helpful when you're doing something research-based like we're about to be doing. Yeah. Because thinking about it, like, don't think of it as like just the time period that it takes for writing, because the research is a whole other beast that's added on to that. Like, you're finding your own topic for what you want to focus on. And once you have that topic, you need to be researching articles to back up whatever evidence that you find. And you're constantly needing to ask yourself, like, does this match what I'm trying to say? Is this good evidence for what I'm talking about? And you're probably going to read a few articles that you're not even going to use. So it's going to be a process to kind of work through those things. And that's the kind of mindset you gotta get into when you're doing this research, that you're not going to find everything straight away, that it's a process of like working through things that to finally put yourself in a spot where you can get down your evidence and put together the paper.
Exactly. And to Chris's point about like with the researching, is once the research is done and then it's time to start writing the paper, the more time and kind of well collected you are with how you organize your research, the so much easier it's going to be to write the essay, right? It's like that idea of like being prepped and being organized. Like my wife and I are hosting Thanksgiving this year for our family, my family and her family. And it's like the day before Thanksgiving, we do a ton of prep, right? Like I have like all my vegetables chopped. I have like my turkey brined. I have like a ton of stuff done. And then this way, when I wake up Thanksgiving morning, I don't have to worry about like, I've got to peel like and chop up 20 onions, or I've got to peel a bunch of potatoes, or I've got to do whatever. It's like all that kind of like heavy lifting, like busy work to get.
You have all your ingredients ready in advance.
Exactly. Yeah. There's a phrase in cooking, and it's called mise en place. And that just means like have everything ready to go in its place. And then when it's time to start cooking, everything's quick and ready to go in front of you. And I think that same philosophy applies a lot to like when we're learning something, right? Or when we're writing an essay. If everything's like well laid out and in front of you and you have a clear understanding of the articles and a clear understanding of where you're going to go, then writing the essay feels really straightforward. And I don't want to use the word easy because I'm not trying to be like patronizing, like, because sometimes I say things like the essay will write itself, but it kind of does in a way because it's like
Things
like,
fall into place because
exactly.
you have everything
That's
laid out
That's a
already.
much better
Yeah.
way of saying it, right? Like things just like they click in. It's like boom, boom. I mean, think about like, I don't know if you ever put together Legos. Like my son loves Legos, and I put stuff together with him sometimes. But it's like he gets like all these little organized piles for each step, and then when it's time to do them, it's like now this one, this one, this one. And it's really easy. Whereas it would be super hard if every single block was in like this giant ass pile, and then we're like, try to find this one. Instead, now Lego bags them all individually. Then like one set might have 20 individual little bags. And for this step, you need bag number 1. And then you put that one together. And it's like, it makes everything fall into place very easily. So let's talk research paper. And here's what we're looking at with this thing. So for this research project, you're going to identify a meaningful problem faced by people within your community. You're going to investigate the background and the causes of the problem, and you're going to learn about potential solutions in order to be an advocate for the best solution. So for the purpose of this project, you're free to interpret your community in any way you like. So for example, you might choose the research problem faced by students on your campus in your community, which could be Solano College specifically, or it could be maybe other college campuses, maybe community college in general. You can think about geographic community. It could be things that you see happening in your city, in your neighborhood. It could be cultural community, right? This could be based off of religion, ethnicity, gender identity, right? For example, other communities that people have chose to focus on is student athletes. People have focused on being in the military, being veterans, being spouses of people who are actively in the military, right? Parenting, like there's so many different communities that you can identify, and it's really up to you in what direction that you want to go. So it's really important for this essay to choose something that you care about and that you want to write about, right? Like, because you're going to be spending a good chunk of time working on this paper. So don't choose a topic that you don't really care about, and don't choose a topic that you're like, I really don't want to. Like, sometimes people will choose a topic and they can be great, but like, if you don't want to choose a topic that like bums you out or like makes you just like feel a certain way when you're writing this paper, then don't choose that topic, right? Like, but if there's something that maybe you're really interested in, if there's a major you have, if there's something that interested you throughout this semester or something you're passionate about learning about, that'd be a great topic to focus on. What was that, Chris? Sorry.
A career field that you're interested in?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right. It could be a career field you're interested in. Like, this semester, like one of the things, like if I was writing this paper, I mean, I feel like I've been kind of like hit over the head for the last 2 years with everything COVID related. But the one thing that's kind of gotten me pretty interesting is as I'm seeing what's happening on campus with how this vaccine mandate is impacting students who are being tested or, finding time to be able to get the vaccine, whatever. I would say, like, how are people in different communities impacted by something like that? That might be something that's interesting, or, it's just whatever is, there might be something happening in the news is interesting to you, right? But the important thing is that you choose something that you care about. I've had students write about issues related to music, to art, right? So many different possibilities of where you can go. That's the big thing, is you just want to pick a topic and a community that you care about, and then start diving into. So your task is demonstrate that the problem you've selected exists by defining and analyzing the problem and then posing a solution. You have to provide enough contextual information to show your readers the scope of the problem and explain who or what is affected and how or why they're affected. Most important, you need to cite evidence from quality sources that will convince your readers the problem is serious and worthy of their attention. Use logical reasoning and credible evidence. Your goal is is to persuade the reader that your proposed solution is feasible and that it's better than alternative solutions. So a strong proposal will anticipate and respond to objections the reader might have, and specifically explain how the solution could be implemented. So the big thing you want to think about is you're identifying there being a problem, and you're saying, like, here is what I think would be able to help with this issue. Here's what I researched, here's the problem, here's details that I found about this problem, and then here's what I think would be able to help. And a lot of times, like maybe over this next few days, start thinking about things that you see if you want to focus on your own community, right? If you want to focus on maybe like, I don't know, Fairfield, for example, or the Bay Area, for example, right? That you could start to see like what are some problems you're seeing. Like I think about that all the time. Like when I'm driving through town, I live in Fairfield, and there's certain things that I see where I'm like, this is a problem that I see getting worse in our community, right? Like I see, for example, a lot of businesses closing down. I see like a lot of storefronts like downtown Fairfield. There's been the same empty buildings downtown Fairfield for a long time, right? And then maybe a little store will open and then it'll go away, and then it'll open and it'll go away. And so I'm like, well, what's the blame for that? What's impacting that? Is it big box stores? Is it places like Walmart, Costco, these giant stores that are closing down? Is it Amazon? Is it the impact that, having things just shipped to your house will affect you? And so like, I'm curious about that. And maybe I want to learn about that. And so I can start researching the impact that, things like Amazon and different mail order, stores can have on local businesses. Another thing that I see happening significantly in Fairfield, I'm like out riding my bike or going for walks or driving around town. And last night was exceptionally cold. And I saw like, like we do many other days, like people sleeping on the side of the street, and it's getting progressively worse in our town. And I would say like, when I was thinking about that, like being cold, driving in my car, imagining what that would be like for somebody laying on the street, and people freezing to death and things like that. And so I'm curious, like, why does that problem exist? What's being done to remedy that problem? What's our community doing? Because it doesn't seem to be doing anything in California but getting worse, right? So what are solutions, and why are those not being implemented? And maybe that's something that I want to research. And so really it can be, anything. And those can be just things that I see when I'm riding around, but it can also be things that I care about and things that I'm curious about, right? And things that like, maybe I think about like my kids and experiences they have, or like my kids just got done playing soccer this season, and it was a really, really positive experience. But it was also one of those things that like, when I signed them up for soccer, it made me realize how expensive it is, right? Like it's several $100s just to register a couple kids for soccer, not counting all the time you have to spend, the evenings, the gear you have to buy. And so I was like, thinking about it is like, as positive of an experience it is for my kids to do this, what type of resources are available for families who have multiple children who would love to be able to play sports, but because of socioeconomic barriers aren't able to? Are there different things happening in the community? Are there, different ways of reaching out and giving our kids this opportunity that really helps build character, right? And so I would do maybe some research about that. So it's like anything that's curiosity to you, that's something that you want to dive into. And don't feel that your topic has to be one that's like a traditional academic topic to be able to research. I had a student do this really awesome research paper on the community identified was like being a gamer, and about how like the direction that video games are going, and how video games are starting to create this like almost like gambling that's happening with like what are called loot crates in video games, where like you pay real money to unlock these things in games that could potentially be giving you really like high-end items in the game, or just give you junk. But people get addicted to them, and the video game companies, it was a super interesting research about how like video game companies are using a lot of the same strategies that like casinos use to be able to like feed this like addictive gambling nature that people have to keep them like going at these loot crates and spending more and more money. And it was a super interesting paper, but it was on something that like conventionally didn't seem like, oh, and this is what an academic essay would have at the end of English 1. Yeah, Sebastian.
That's so smart.
Yeah, it was a cool
That
topic.
makes so much sense.
It was one of my favorite papers that I read. And I think it was the reason that I think it's a cool topic is like it tapped into something that student was interested about and wrote that paper.
Yeah. I can't just steal that idea though.
No, you can find a version of it, sure.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of other things to talk about in that same field of like video games and the way that they're, recently trying to like get as much money out of people. Like there's other topics to talk about. Yeah,
absolutely. And you can you can go in that direction, sure.
Okay.
So here's kind of hint, and we're going to talk about outlining this essay and all that kind of stuff. So this stuff is just, I'm not going to go into like a ton of this because we're going to be focusing on this over time. And then let's see here. So you want to think about, this is the biggest, essay you worked on for the semester, right? So all of your paragraphs, like these are, you're kind of exercising those skills we built over the semester, like well-developed body paragraphs, organize each body paragraph as supporting your thesis. a strong introduction where you give context, right? Sentences that flow really well, that are sophisticated. Be sure that you're dealing with a problem which in some way is controversial or debatable. For this paper, this paper does need a thesis, right? Which you're going to be proving. And so your thesis, and we'll talk about this idea of like, sometimes your thesis can be a statement, like here's an argument you're making. Other times your thesis can be what you would call is like a prevailing question. Like, I don't know what the answer is to this yet, but I'm curious about it. Like, I've identified there's this problem happening in the community. What is the best way to serve people in this community? Because right now it's a massive problem and it's literally killing people, whatever you want to argue, right? Then the rest of your essay kind of explores that curiosity. So you can make it as a strong statement in the beginning, but it can also be, I don't know the answer to this yet, but as I dive through the rest of this essay, I'm going to kind of figure it out as I'm getting to the end.
And I think that could be, I think you'd, well, it's a lot easier to do your research when like you're thinking of something a little bit more specific, because think of the way of like, if I want to go out to dinner and my whole thing is like, I just want something to eat, I'm probably not going to end up going anywhere because I'm not going to be narrowing down like anything in particular of like where I want to go. Am I interested in getting burritos, or like, am I interested in getting something halal or something like that? That's going to like help me narrow down and give me like some better options of where I want to be going. It's the same thing with in the essay. It's like the more particular topics that you have, the easier you're going to be able to find some research for it, because you're not going to be overwhelmed with like a million things. If I just search up homelessness,
right,
there's a billion different topics and ways to talk about homelessness.
Exactly.
But if I say like, how does like the transit system in the Bay Area affect homelessness, like people's ability to get to work, from home to work with ease, how does that affect people's homelessness? I'm going to find a whole lot more research based off of that, because I'm looking for something more particular when I'm doing searching through the databases.
Exactly. That's going to be a much easier paper to write than it would be to just like generally, I'm going to focus on homelessness, like Chris said, because then you're going to find like hundreds of thousands of articles on that, and it's just going to be super overwhelming. So it's like limiting it down is going to be helpful. I mean, that's one of the skills, that you built working through LR10, and this is where the work you're doing in LR10 really informs the work you're doing in English 1. Also, when you're thinking about your topic or the question that you're asking or what you're researching, try to come at it from a place of like curiosity, and not necessarily I want to write this paper to affirm what I already believe to be true about this idea. Right. I think that's one of the mistakes that sometimes we make in things that we're researching, is that we're not willing to say, maybe my mind can be changed for what I already believe to be true about this, because that's very likely to happen, right? Is if you're only looking for articles that affirm the opinion that you have about this, then maybe you're closing out the potential for some deep critical thought to be happening, right? So it's like, if you were to ask me like, well, what do I think is the solution for homelessness in the Bay Area? I'm not an expert, but I feel like I have in my mind right now what I think is a viable solution, because I've seen models like that work other places across the state, right? Like, and it's like, if I were to say, oh, well, what like, the mayor of San Diego, Falconer, did seems like a viable option of like creating these places where people are able to have, medical intervention, be able to have a place to stay, things like that, but then make it illegal for people to sleep on the street and then give them the option of some place to go. That seems like a pragmatic solution to me. But it doesn't mean that when I go into my research, I'm only going to be looking for articles to support that thing that I already think is a good way of fixing it, right? Because what I might find is that is a model that doesn't work in other contexts, or I might find that model is complicated for a number of reasons, or I might find that model only is able to support a certain percentage of people, and that it's, if you make something illegal and there's not enough beds at this kind of like big resource place that's built, then what do those people do, right? And so like the reality is like, what I'm making is like, be open to have your mind changed, and don't just look for things that serve what you want it to, right? And it's like, it's kind of like that idea of like, being in a situation where you're creating like justification for something because you want it to be that way. It's really easy for me to only look for articles that support the opinion that I have on a topic than it is to just go into it and be like, look, I'm just going to research this thing and I'm going to see what I find. And maybe my idea stays consistent through the whole thing, or maybe my mind gets changed through doing my research. I mean, that's education, right? Like that's the whole point of diving into this, is like, I'm going into this with curiosity and here's what I'm learning along the way. Okay, so we want to make sure that your essay is answering the so what question really well, right? And so like criteria for success, here's the things you want to think about. So you're going to have at least 4 sources throughout this essay, right? 3 of the sources you want to find from library research and 1 additional source of your choice. So I left this additional source of your choice really open. The additional source of your choice can be another article that you find from library databases, right? But it can also be something like maybe a documentary, maybe a podcast, maybe a TED Talk, an interview, a book that you found, right? The point is you want that 4th source to be something, and the reason that I leave this open is, for example, a lot of times seeing something like a documentary can really open up a whole new level of understanding of something as you get a firsthand view at it, right? So it's one thing for me to read articles about something. It's another thing for me to actually see people who are experiencing this thing. And so like a documentary could be really helpful. Same thing with like a podcast or an interview, right? Being able to hear somebody talk about it. You could also conduct your own interviews if you wanted to for this. I had a student who was writing a paper about issues related to immigration, and they interviewed their parents, right? And learned a lot about their parents' experience in the context of this essay. So know that you can use a wide variety of things to be able to help you with this, because I want you to be kind of creative. You can use the library databases for your 4th source if you want to, but I think that like leaving it open for saying like maybe interviewing somebody, having some sort of experience, something like that can be really helpful and provide a new insight into your paper. So you want to make sure you're framing your quotations really well, right? Like introduction, give the quote, and then the analysis behind these ideas. This is incredibly important for this research paper because I don't know, I'm not the things that you've researched. I don't know the readings that you're providing. So we've talked about this semester, this idea of like writing and pretending that your reader has not read the same things that you have. This is incredibly important for this research paper because I haven't, right? Unless there's some coincidental situation where like, oh, I've read this article from a library database, which is probably going to be fairly unlikely, right? Because I don't have, unless you're writing about maybe things related to education, I don't have a lot of expertise on these topics that people are researching, which is a cool place to be for me reading your papers, right? But it's also one of those things that you need to make sure you're giving context, because in this case, you're in the position of expertise and I'm the one who's the outsider who needs to have context to be able to follow along with the points that you're making. So make sure that you're giving enough context on the things that you read and the topic you're exploring, because you're the one who's done all the research and gained the expertise, and I'm the outsider in this situation. Next, you want to make sure you're citing in MLA format. Super easy when using the databases, just like LR10 taught us. You can just click get citation, copy and paste it right over into your works cited page. And then this should be about 1,250 words or about 5 pages, right? So there's going to be components to this research paper, right? And I'll be announcing the different due dates along the way. The first one is going to be due at the end of this week, which is the research proposal. And I'll show you that in just a second. The next thing, and I'll talk about these next week, they're going to be what's called source reports. And your source reports are basically little write-ups about the research that you're doing. They're not super long. They're about a page long, but they help you stay on track. And I'm gonna have you turn in a couple of these along the way to finishing the research paper, right? And so source reports are like, you found a source, and basically, and I'll go into some detail on this next week, you tell me what is a source you found, what's it about, why is it reliable, how are you planning on using it in your research project? And so it's like kind of,
sorry, as Jose was saying earlier, like this is the point where you're organizing all your Lego pieces. The source reports is that piece where you're getting everything together that's going to help you, that's going to help everything fall into place when you finally get to writing the paper.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's it, right? It's like you're putting it together, and this is one of those places where now I'm able to follow, like you're able to follow along, and you're able to really think about these sources in the context of how I'm going to use in my essay. Then we'll talk about outlining this paper, and then you'll turn in the draft of the essay. and that'll be at the end of the semester. So here's what the research proposal looks like. Really straightforward. So the first step of writing it is choosing what you want to write about. This is due at the end of this week, right? It's the only thing other than finishing Noah's book that you have to do, right? You should be thinking about your essay number 3, but the research proposal is due at the end of this week. And this is not super long, about a page is plenty. You can just number these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and just write a little bit. It's not a formal essay. It doesn't have to be written in like formal paragraphs. It's just some writing, right? Like diving into these ideas. So first, describe the community you're analyzing as thoroughly as you can, so someone unfamiliar with it can understand it. And this someone unfamiliar with it is me in this case, right? What is it like to be a member of this community? How is this community viewed by a larger society? So what is a community that you're going to be analyzing? Next, what problem related to this community are you analyzing? How does it impact the community you've just described? Next, what are all the other communities, people, group, or forces that have an impact on this problem? What do you believe to be some underlying of this causes of this problem are? So these are kind of your guesses or your observations now of what are creating this problem, right? So just like if I were to go into the idea of the community I'm exploring as small business in Fairfield, what do I think are some of the issues that impact this? I would say like Amazon. I would say like consumers in Fairfield, like we're probably, I'm guessing, to blame for this, right? Like I could go to a local store. I did that just the other day. There was a piece that I needed for my bike. And I went to like a local bike shop and they're like, yeah, we don't have it. We could order it, but it'll be a couple of weeks. And I was like, ugh. Or I could go online and I could have it delivered to my house tomorrow, right? And I know that I'm to blame for that local bike shop potentially one day closing because I could have waited, right? But I really wanted that specific thing to be able to work on my bike because I had time to do it yesterday. And so I needed to have it by then. And so like, I would say that maybe we're also to like, that's another part, a factor that impacts this community, right? And so like, you're just kind of thinking and giving some details about that. Next, think about, where is your curiosity? Why did you choose this topic? What do you want to understand or research in order to write this paper? So like, really, what are you curious about? What do you want to learn about? Why are you incentivized to dive into this? Maybe this is something like Chris said, related to a potential career you want to go into. Maybe it's related to a career you're currently in, right? Or a life experience you have, or something that you care a lot about. And then what do you already know about this topic, right? A lot of these things we already come to with expertise, or we just come to with day in, day out observation. So tell me what you already know about this. So this should be somewhere in the neighborhood of a page, page and a half, something like that. And you'll turn this in by the end of this week. Any questions about research proposals or the research prompt or what we're doing this week? Okay, cool. So if you have any questions while you're working, let us know. If you have any questions about what you might want to research, right? Like if you feel stuck, I don't know what I want to research. I've got a couple of ideas. Like sometimes just talking about it with someone is a really effective way of thinking about something that you might want to write about. Sometimes like kind of like, just taking a step back and thinking about the things in your life that you care about that are important. Like I said, just yesterday, like seeing over the weekend, like, seeing the end of the season, like kind of celebrations for both my son and my daughter were like, made me realize like how important of a thing like sports are in kids' lives, right? Like even, my kids aren't going to grow up and be professional soccer players, right? Like, I don't think, right? But like, it's just one of those things that like, if anything else, even if they never play it again, like other than a little bit in their childhood, like I realized how important it was for helping them to develop character. And so I started thinking about that. Like right now, I'm like, just that experience yesterday would help give me some ideas of what I might want to research because I don't know a lot about it and I'm curious about it, right? And so think about things that are important to you, things that experiences you have, things you observe in your community. And over the next couple of days, they should kind of get those gears grinding a little bit in your head to think about what might you want to put a proposal through about, and then you'll submit your research proposal and we'll go from there.
Yeah.
Cool. So if you have any questions when you're working, please let us know. I'll be available in office hours today until about 1 o'clock. So definitely if you have any questions, drop in, let me know, and then we'll go from there. All right. Thanks, everybody.